Guys, thanks for having us today. We're excited to be here. For our listeners that are tuning in, obviously they've seen some of the stuff we're doing on social media and with marketing. We're starting to do video recording, which is pretty fun, and so appreciate you guys letting us join you here on the site of one of the premier technology places in the country. Thanks for having us today. Yeah, Matt and Ryan, thank you guys for being here. As we get started today, I guess, Matt, we'll start with you. Just tell our audience about who you are, where you're from, and how you ended up here.
Yeah, so I grew up on a grain and livestock farm in eastern Ohio. Went to school at Ohio State and University of Kentucky. Moved out here to Iowa 18 years ago with the goal of really growing public-private partnerships, and have just fallen in love with the state and continue to work here at Iowa State University. I'm a faculty member in the Ag and Biosystems Engineering Department and the director here at our Digital Ag Innovation Lab.
Good. Thanks for being here with us, Ryan.
Yeah, Ryan Huffman. I'm originally from Central Iowa. Bounced around to a few different schools here, but ultimately ended up here at Iowa State to finish up my doctorate degree. And I've always been fascinated with data and how we improve agriculture. And so that's really what led me into agronomics and how to leverage data to understand how to improve the agronomy side of what we do. Been here at the university for about 4 years now, and truly understand now, why engineering and agronomy needs to be complementary, not two disciplines that don't interact with one another. So it's been a fascinating time here at the university.
Well, as soon as I toured this place, I know Matt well, I know Ryan well, but as soon as I toured this, heard them talk about it, heard what they've been doing, I was like, man, we got to get them on the podcast because I know that listeners across the U.S. would find it pretty fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. It's cool to be in this room where we are recording because, I don't know, Ryan, what, a couple months ago?
Yeah, early February.
Yeah, we actually got to bring a bunch of our best growers in here and experience your guys' planter clinic, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but it's cool to be back. That was, according to our growers, probably the best event we've ever held and the best planter clinic they've been to, so really
does that speak for this facility and the people, or does that
yeah,
speak
I don't know
for
what
on
that
your...
Yes.
I don't know what that says more about, but excited to ask you guys kind of our opening question. And so regardless of where we are recording, we like to just kind of start with what has you excited in agriculture today?
Yeah, just to lead off. So again, thank you guys for being here, right, at this facility. But there's so much to get excited about in agriculture today. Like, to me, it's so fun to see the relevance of ag technology in today's market, right? So precision ag's 30 years old. Ag tech, as we see it today, is probably like 20 years old. And it's no longer a niche, right? Farmers look at technology as like, how do we leverage that to do more on our farm, protect the yields we have, maximize productivity, improve efficiency. And it's exciting to see that we're not pushing the rock up the hill anymore. I feel like the rock's going down the hill, and farmers are leveraging it.
Yeah, people are asking for it instead of almost pushing against it, right?
Yeah.
For a long time, it was like, why do I have to integrate this? Now it's helped me get more of it.
Ryan, how do you answer that question? We got two guests on here, so we're doing something a little bit different this time. What's your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I would add on to that. So specifically, integrating technology into the ag tech world that we live today, it's automation, making smarter machines, smarter implements. So sometimes when people hear automation, they think driverless tractors. So that could also just mean smarter machines, smarter implements, and that's an entire production system approach, right? Planters all the way to harvesters. And that takes one of the things the operator has to do out of the cab. They have to be an expert in grain marketing. They have to be an expert mechanic. They have to be an expert agronomist. And so if they can turn off one of those jobs or tasks in their mind and the machine just making that decision for them, that's really what I'm excited about in the next 5-10 years.
That's really good. Andrew, as we get started today, introduce our listeners and viewers to our topic.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super excited to interview Matt, Ryan, and then Ben. We're going to have Ben on the show too for the management portion. Just the work that they're doing is just so fascinating to me. Precision technology is continuously advancing. I remember my first job, I was telling Matt, I felt old when I was touring this facility, and they have like the original Ag Leader box that I remember starting my career in the crop production world, putting those boxes into tractors. And you didn't have a visual map of the data. You just pulled out this card, loaded it in your computer, and put an SMS, and then just waited for the information to load. So it's kind of cool to see the research they're doing, kind of where we've been, where we're going, and they're helping lay the foundation for the future of ag technology. They're helping train growers. They're helping train agronomists, and so the work that they're doing is critical, I think. So in part one, we're going to talk about the science of precision technology, all the research, all the work that goes into figuring out how to continuously advance the technology we're using in tractors today. And then in part two, we're gonna hold true to our show. We're gonna talk about real world management, and so we're gonna have Matt, Ryan, and Ben tell us how we can use these management practices and technology to advance our management practices. So let's open up. One of the things that really fascinates me about this lab is all the patents you hold. So Matt, tell us about some of the patents you hold.
Yeah, I mean, we're fortunate to work at an institution and in a state that has a lot of partners that like to collaborate together. So, our journey, we for 15 years now, we've been focused on, how do we create innovations that get into the marketplace, right? And for us, in the engineering side, that is through patenting and tech transfer and license. So, we have 90 licenses and patents that are in the hands of commercial partners. There's 60 of them today that farmers use, right? That are out in the commercial marketplace, and some of them are things you would think, well, that sounds like normal things, right? Like work in grain yield monitoring innovations, right? But you probably never guess that the patent for the only commercially available sugarcane yield monitor in the world was done here at Iowa State in Ames, Iowa, right? Because we don't grow much sugarcane in this this part of the world. But we've had a tremendous opportunity to be involved in, I would say generally in patents in a couple of different key areas. We work a lot in grain and crop sensing. So you think about like putting the number on the screen. When all of our farmers in the country see a number on the screen, that comes from somewhere, right? There's a lot of science and technology behind whether it's something as simple as a vehicle speed or something as complex as mass flow, yield, moisture content, soil conditions, right? Things like that are on the screen. We work a tremendous amount in that space, and we think there's a tremendous amount of responsibility there, because you got to think about the decisions that are being made from that information, right? I like to talk about we don't grow a lot of cotton here in Iowa either, but we do in the U.S. And the range of moisture content in cotton is like 8 to 12%. And when you start harvesting above 12%, that cotton will yellow as it's stored prior to getting processed. You got to bleach the cotton on it. So it's really important for farmers as they're harvesting later in the day and the dew is setting in on that cotton. Like, they have to stop harvesting, or they're going to have a loss in product quality. And we were part of a team that released the first commercially available cotton moisture sensor about 8 years ago, and it's just been awesome to see those sort of things have a direct impact on farmers and their ability to make good quality management decisions in the cab.
It's funny how often I learn about something other than corn and soybeans, because I know about zero with any other crop. So it seems like every time I'm learning something new.
Well, that's what I was just thinking though, as you're explaining that, Matt. It's wild, because I've lived within 5 miles of this facility for almost my entire life, and I know I mean until a few months ago, I feel like I had very little understanding of just the depth of discovery that was happening here, and certainly what's utilized today in the field. So that's pretty neat. We just recently sat and we're looking through one of our customers' data, trying to understand a couple things, and it's amazing in such a short period of time what we have access to today that we didn't have even 3 and 4 years ago. I mean, downforce and ground contact and speed, and just all of these things that help you intuitively. Ryan, you made the comment that we have to be expert agronomists, and I would agree with you. But I think a lot of times we have so little information to make decisions by. Now that now we have more of that information, it helps inform the conversation. But
I think with that too, I'll interrupt. It helps us be better agronomists. I think at the same time, some of this technology can help us be worse at what we do, right? Because we rely on it so much, we just assume that it's working. Maybe don't know how to use it, and it's not functioning properly.
Yeah.
So it can help us. I mean, it can make us go backwards sometimes too.
We had this interesting conversation. We'll talk about that when we talk about the planter clinic, how important it is to understand the technology and how it impacts us. But
It's
Ryan,
I want to add one
Yeah.
more thing. It's also really, I think we have to realize, like, for technology to be successful, it has to be successful at a global scale.
Yeah.
So we're making recommendations for products, for fertility management, seed placement. Those are local decisions, right? A yield monitor has to work in every crop, in every continent, in every single field, right? And so the level of work and science that goes into that is totally different, because you've got to work on a class 7 combine in canola where you're throwing like a coffee cup of grain per second into the tank versus some of these really large combines now that are shoveling buckets and buckets of corn through the clean grain elevator. So that span is something that we've really invested in, because to truly innovate, you have to do it at a global scale. You have to get products out that help all farmers.
Well said.
Awesome. Ryan, talk about the facility and the technology in this facility, the agronomy lab, the shop, the equipment used to work with the sprayers. How does that, first talk about that, and then how does that set this facility apart and help with that research?
Yeah, I'll try to touch on as many of those and remind me if I leave things out.
Sure.
So we have about 80,000 square feet in this facility here. It's about 2 acres under roof, partitioned out in a few different areas. We have some training spaces like we're sitting in here today, and then we obviously have office spaces for our staff, and then a majority of it is the high bay working space. So machinery is not getting smaller, and we need more space to just physically work on that stuff and then get it out of the elements so we're not constantly outside all the time. So that's one component of it. The second one you touched on was kind of our grain agronomy lab. So as Matt mentioned, a lot of grain sensing, a lot of grain detection and grain monitoring that happens here. A lot around fall. So yield is a big time for us. Obviously, we're bringing a lot of samples through the lab. We want to understand everything that we can about that grain, because as you guys know, you can go back in time and understand where was that corn stressed, and then we can learn a lot about what happened in June, even though we're sitting in maybe October, November. So about every instrument that you can think of that's used, from GAC, grain moistures, to understand everything from carbohydrate composition, protein content, weight, size of the ear, all the volumetric type measurements that we're really interested in, and then putting every piece of that puzzle that we can together to understand what exactly happened. Because more times than not in our research, we're trying to mess things up so we can learn from it. We're not trying to go after that 300 bushel crop. We're trying to get 150 to understand why did it get 150, to then help us understand and move to 300. So hopefully that was about all your question. There was a lot.
Yeah, that's good. I really like that grain yield component. Looking back at a lot of research historically, it was always, hey, we had this response from this application or this management practice, but we never really looked at how that actually impacted the yield components. You got the number of ears per acre, kernels per ear, kernel weight, all that stuff influences. So by understanding that, we can help develop a story as to when we maybe impacted yield or when that stress occurred. So I really like that you guys are doing that.
Yeah, I would add to that one of the comments, and it seems like we're talking about the planter clinic often, but some of the work that you guys did, I know at the end of the day, I won't give it away, so that way people can experience it for the first time. But you guys do a really kind of cool reveal that just shows what happens when you get it right and what happens when it's maybe done inappropriately. And I know I watched 30 or 40 growers. Just kind of, it was like all the light bulbs went on at the exact same time. Each one of the components we talked about through the day, it was like, okay, there I can see exactly why it's so critical that I get these steps right. So I think that's really intuitive.
Yeah. So Matt, let's dig into some of these individual pieces of equipment that you guys have researched at this lab. But let's talk about planters and row units. So I know you've done a lot of research looking at row units and the impact that they can have on all the different things we look at as agronomists, growers, and consultants, spacing, singulation, all that stuff. Talk to me about your research looking at planters and row units.
Yeah, I think I think one thing that we've always tried to take a perspective on is like the job of the machinery side of agriculture is about protecting yield, right? It's like we know that there's 600 some bushel per acre potential in the bag, and that as soon as we open the bag, we start to strip away from that.
Yep.
And so when we think about the work that we've done in planters and in automation and in education behind it, it's really all about how do we make sure that we maximize the job quality on an individual plant level, right? Like the no seed left behind sort of statement there, right? And so we've really invested quite a bit over the last 10 years in understanding at a plant to plant level what kind of variability exists, right, in yield. And I saw my first yield map in 1995, and I think if I saw the same field in 2025, right, it would look the same. The legend would be different. The numbers would be different, right? Mm-hmm. But the spatial distribution of yield is really not going to change, right? The red areas still red areas, green areas are green areas. And so we've really been chasing like, okay, what can we do to maximize the uniformity of plants in those green areas? What would you guys, so in your best part of customer fields, right? what do you think the plant-to-plant variability would be?
Yield variability?
Yield variability. Like one plant to the next. 10%, 20%, 40%.
Oh, I would, in the most extreme cases?
Best part of the field.
Oh,
Prettiest
best part of the field?
I bet it's less than 15%.
I was going to say 10 to 15%. Higher?
Wrong direction. Yeah. I mean, it's quite a bit higher than that.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, COV is the kind of one segment, right? So you think about like is around 20%, right? So within a single sort of row, right? A 20-foot row length in that best part of the field, right? Which all got the same weather and has relatively the same soil. Right. We're talking 25 feet away. You've got plants that are going 160 and you've got plants going well over 300, right? And so we've really, on the planter side, been trying to understand what can we do through technology and management to help with that, right? Certainly, singulation is a low-hanging fruit in that sector, right? And I would say that we have a tremendous amount of really good planter products on the market today that have taken our singulation to the point where it's not even a question anymore. But we also know that we're planting faster than we used to, and we know that because of that, downforce is more important than it used to be, and things like simple things like how well are your closing wheels aligned with your furrow, right? I mean, these are all little things that do stack up and strip away from our yield potential. And so when we look at these from a planter perspective, like yes, we're trying to discover what those core responses are. Ryan's team does a tremendous amount of work in this space, but ultimately our goal is to make it go away. Our goal is that when I as a farmer choose to go plant my crop, nothing that happens in that process should degrade from the quality and the potential of that seed coming out of the ground and having every opportunity to be nurtured and survive to a to a healthy age 110 days later when we destroy it with a combine, right?
Yeah.
So that's really our philosophy around planters is is focusing on a plant level sort of response and understanding what do we need to do at a plant level to drive and maximize individual success.
I'm curious, what kind of variability do you get in the worst parts of the field?
Yeah, so this, so believe it or so we've done this for 10 years, and the reality is that you can make it worse in the worst part of the field, but the plant-to-plant variability, it doesn't change a tremendous amount.
The scale just moves.
The scale moves, right? Which starts to beg some question about how much of that variability is actually already in the bag before you open the bag, right? It becomes a seed quality issue, and we know we can degrade it, and we've been successful at identifying for example, ride quality, right? I mean, planters, many planters today with any level of technology or downforce have a ride quality metric, right? What does ride quality mean? I mean, Sean, you said you were at our planter clinic a couple months ago, right?
Right. So, yeah. So, boy, I feel like I should be better prepared to answer this question. So that's the metric we were trying to look into when we were looking at a particular field last week, that we didn't like the variability of emergence. And so I feel like I'm going to fail this class, but it's a combination of your downforce. Isn't it a combination of all those metrics?
Well, it's kind of a trick question because every company that presents ride quality has a little different metric behind it, right? But in general, yeah, I mean, it's a combination of how much acceleration is happening at the row unit. Sometimes it's about you've got ground contact, which is a different measurement there. If you're like, we were really interested in, like, does it matter, right? And it doesn't have units on it. So like, what's good or bad? How do you map red versus green? So we went after a pretty intensive effort to do essentially hard stops in fields. When we saw ride quality start to get away from us, we stopped in the fields, we dug seeds, we really investigated. This gets back into the graduate students, undergraduates, and staff that really drive a lot of this core research. And today we can map all that up together. Like, we know that when ride quality starts to drop below about 94%, that we get, generally that's telling you you've got some cloddiness happening. You've got lack of depth. You've got some seed to soil contact issues. And we've tracked this all the way back to saying that, as soon as you get south of 94, I mean, you're going to start losing yield, and you're looking at somewhere around 18 to 20% yield loss in those situations.
This is fascinating because if our listeners want to know how accurate these guys are, this is actually cool because this is not part of our script. Andrew's not this intuitive about writing good dialogue. We literally were at 93% ride quality,
Yeah.
and we zoomed into parts of the field where what I believe was happening is most of the field was mellow and had a good seed bed, and then the high-speed planter was hitting spots that were wet and worked poorly. And when you physically scouted it, you saw the planter was lifting up. It wasn't having time to respond, and that seed was getting shallower and shallower. In some instances, the furrow wasn't even getting closed.
Yeah.
And so, you'd go to the best part of the field and you'd see almost perfect singulation, seed depth was great, and then you'd hit these spots. And the funny part is, the particular grower, I remember the day the field got planted, he's like, I don't know if I should be out here. But it's interesting you use the metric of 94% because this particular field, the ride quality when we got into that spot was at 93 and lower in some areas. But it's fascinating because the thing that I was thinking after that conversation with this particular grower is how valuable is it today that we can have a significantly more informed conversation about what happened. And it seems like when I think back to, Ryan, when we got to do a little work together and stuff, it always seemed like it was kind of, the seed company versus the grower or the grower versus the agronomist. And it was almost this kind of antagonistic relationship instead of sitting down and just saying, hey, we all know what we're trying to accomplish. Now let's go figure out what actually happened. And then let's make decisions moving forward. And so we've already learned a couple things this year. Part of it is maybe how we think about planting, but then a lot of it for us then is evaluating seed response because not every seed responds the same to maybe the lower ride quality or the conditions we plant into. So it's really good.
It's good insight.
I do, Matt. I want to come back to kind of this idea of improving the planters. So it seems like it's improving radically quickly. I mean, it seems like we went a long time with almost no changes, and now, I know we'll talk a little bit about some of the technology you guys are working on, but either Matt or Ryan, you mentioned singulation as being low-hanging fruit, but when your team thinks about what are we going to attack, in what order, how do you guys kind of think through that as far as participating in improving the planter?
It's going back to the fundamentals. I think technical people like we are, it's really easy to complicate things out of the gate. We can spend all day on a whiteboard and make this thing as confusing as possible and talk in circles. So it's going back to the fundamentals every time. And what is that agronomically, which is the hat that I wear most days? That's getting a clean furrow at appropriate depth and getting the seed into moisture. And you talk about technology, we're talking about growers going to plant faster. 8 miles an hour in a few years is probably going to be slow by some standards.
Yeah.
A colleague of ours, Levi Powell, is an expert in planters that leads the planter clinics that keep getting referenced along with Ben. And he describes it as an explosion. You got a planter with disc openers flying through a field at 8 miles an hour, creating an explosion, dropping seed, and then you're closing that thing up about as fast as it opened. And so if we don't stay focused on the fundamentals of getting into moisture, clean furrow, appropriate, formed sidewalls and all that, we're really kind of lose sight of what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, that's good insight. I mean, I still remember listening to Sean and some of his customers talk about that field day. I wish I could have been there because it sounds like it was just a phenomenal training. And with all the advancements.
You were big timing us that day.
I was. I had better things to do.
Better things to do than hang out with us that day. Yeah.
So
I think what he said is, I might stop by if I can. I think it was something like that. So
I think it was more like, let me think about it.
Yeah.
If I'm bored enough, maybe I'll stop by, say hi to you. No. So as we continue the advancements in technology on the planter. Yeah, you brought up the fundamentals. What are these? I'm sure you get a lot of questions from growers. Hey, what should I be looking at on a planter? What are some of the most important things that we could be talking with growers about in terms of the fundamentals of a planter and just understanding how it works, how they operate together, and the impact they can have on singulation, spacing, plant to plant variability.
Yeah. So first, foremost, you got to have the disc openers up front, right? You got to have disc openers that are at not worn, so they're appropriate spacing, appropriate sizing. That's really what's going to set you up for success, creating that V, not only the V shape, but also your depth. Behind it, you have the gauge wheels, and that's really kind of setting up. This is very simplistic, high-level overview, by the way, so we're not going to cover everything that's in a planter clinic. It's 8 hours long. behind that, the gauge wheels are really the fundamental do is pushing air out of the sidewalls and making sure it's got a consistency formation from a soil aggregate perspective. You don't want it too hard, obviously, that sidewall compaction. You don't want it too soft because then you're just going to crumble your furrow before the seed even gets there. And then behind that, you got to close that up. And so the closing wheel's job is mainly to close from the bottom up, push air pockets out, and make sure that you're not putting dry soil on top of wet soil, because then you just really implicated that seed to soil contact and soil moisture, that imbibition, which we know is also critical in the first few hours of that seed's life.
Yeah, just to jump in there too. So one of the biggest secrets about setting up a planter to really perform well it has nothing to do with the planter, and that's tillage and residue management. Right?
Oh yeah,
Like Ryan mentioned the importance of residue in the furrow. You talked about some roughness, right, in the conditions, and so this starts in the fall, right? I mean, particularly when you think about corn falling soybeans, right? We're going to larger and larger headers on combines, and the ability to spread and distribute soybean residue uniformly is a huge driver to the success you have next year. I mean, it'd be interesting to look at some combine maps, Sean, behind the maps you were looking at, because we know for a fact that if you do a poor job of distributing your soybean residue, those soils stay wetter, right? They stay cooler. And guess what happens when you take a field cultivator, a VT, through that colder, wetter conditions, right? When it's all marginal in the spring, right? Anymore, anyways, right? So you get in these early spring conditions, you've just made clods.
Yeah.
Now you got right quality. Now you got poor seed to soil contact.
This whole residue conversation is something I focus a lot on, and I don't know if we have the answer as to how we're going to fix it. Right? It's either going to be removing a certain percentage of residue, or doing something in the fall in terms of spraying something that can help break it down quicker. But even then, we're relying on Mother Nature, temperature, and moisture to help with that process. So all the high yield talks I give, I think that's the biggest challenging one, because it starts with harvest, right? Like you mentioned, it'd be nice if we could evenly spread across 30 foot, right? And you look at a draper head, you're getting 45 foot. So I think that's the one thing that we can talk about: nutrient uptake, nutrient, all the different efficiencies that we do with the nutrients we apply. The one thing we don't have the answer for is residue management. I look forward to that in the management conversation with Ben as we look at these different management practices and their impact on planting and residue management.
Yeah, I really appreciate the call out, Matt, because I think one of the things that we have to continue to push for, and it's valuable, the work that you guys are doing here, helping to educate us, because I look at that and I go, in that particular instance, going back to the example we gave of the planter ride quality, you're exactly right. We ask questions about, well, what was the planter doing that day, not what was the tillage equipment doing this spring, or not what did the combine do last fall. And there's a lot of intuition around that I think is super important, but I also think it's critical. And going back, Ryan, to what you said just about how growers have got to be excellent agronomists, I think the more information we know about the variability, the consequence of that variability, how to eliminate and improve it, the more likely we are as producers to take that responsibility on ourselves, right? Because John Deere can't fix it after the fact if your residue dispersion is poor. They can't fix it after the fact if you do a poor job tilling. And so I think the more educated the grower is, the more likely they are to have probably the appropriate response to that.
I'm going to go off script here as I was thinking and listening to Matt talk about residue management. I'm going to lay the foundation for future research, and if Deere or anybody else's case is listening, if we could have a tool, a camera, that would let us know our residue spread out the back of a combine, that we could make adjustments and help have that conversation. I mean, granted, the wind's going to impact that and make it challenging, but again, it would be cool to be at least give some numbers versus, I mean, how many times does a grower go out the back of a combine and look at that? I mean, some may be a lot, some may be zero, right? If we could have a map that would show a distribution and map out our residue spread, that'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges is that there's no farmer that tries to do a bad job of this, right? But you're definitely, there's times in the fall where you're making a decision like, am I going to just not harvest soybeans because it's really windy that day?
Right.
Or am I going to go out and get beans in the bin before they start to dry down to 8%?
That's a
right?
no-brainer.
A ton of shatter. So these are all just reality, complexities of agriculture.
Yeah, I was just going to expand on the comment Matt made earlier. It's planter clinics do a good job of this. We got some additional programs coming, but for us, we hit on planters. You made the comment earlier about it's the seed industry versus the grower. for us, it's an entire production system process. So like we have some phenomenal data that we show on the extension trail on just what messing up tillage in the fall has for that next year's crop. So the grower can do everything right, but maybe the conditions were just not quite fit for tillage in the fall, and then carried over into the springtime. Now the planter has problems, whether it's ride quality or ground contact, and then you got, maybe ruts or something the sprayer's having to go through. And now you got weed problems that aren't being hit, and then you get, it just continues to be a treadmilling effect, and that's really a point that we highlight in our talks of, taking time to slow down and make sure that job quality is at the highest it can be for every step of that operation.
Yeah, well said.
I think part of the education too, so it's interesting to have you guys, again, the experience we've had with our growers. It's interesting if a manufacturer tells a grower something, they assume there's an ulterior motive. When we've gotten to interact with you guys and our growers, it's kind of like, well, this is coming from a place of like intellectual honesty or scientific research, so it doesn't feel like it comes with the agenda, necessarily that the manufacturer might have. So that seems really valuable. But for the sake of staying on topic, Matt, would you talk a little bit? So we obviously are understanding how important the role of the planter is. Will you talk about some of the technology that your lab has worked on individual row units? So what is John Deere's Furrow Vision, and how does it work?
Yeah, I mean, so Furrow Vision is another adaptation in the continuum of innovation, right? So, like, I'm a big believer that we should never use the term new in agriculture, because we could have this, it wouldn't be a podcast 20 years ago, but, there's always something that's a newly released product, right? Furrow Vision is the next stage of putting machine vision and cameras on ag equipment. And this started about a decade ago in commercial agriculture. And, we use cameras where we try to measure things that are really hard to fundamentally understand, right? So the first time this hit the market was cameras for measuring grain quality, grain damage, right? You can't see grain damage in the seat of a combine. And the Furrow Vision program that Deere's now, introduced publicly, like, it's the next frontier, right? Who knows, who can really know what's happening in the furrow of their planter? How good of a job it is getting, whether it's about firming the furrow up or understanding how much residue is in that furrow. Like, nobody knows.
Yeah.
Nobody knows. You're digging after the fact.
Yeah. Until you find a plant that's like maybe a leaf behind, and you want to figure out why you dig it. And yeah.
So what if we had a camera there? What if you could see it, right, during the process? And that's what Furrow Vision is all about. It's trying to get more insights into the quality of job of tucking that little baby seed into its home to get started. And I can tell you, like, there's other aspects too. We think about like planting green and cover crops, right? That's a really complex planting environment. Well, this makes that a little bit easier too, right? If you're in no-till and you're having a hard time adjusting, you're trying to make transitions in your tillage practices where you can't just rely on what you've done the last several years, like that visual insight is really valuable to help dial that planter in.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that piece up, because it was interesting. My oldest son just turned 12, and we were driving the other day in the truck, and we saw a no-till field. And he goes, "What's wrong with that one?" And it was funny because the cover crop had been terminated, and so everything else is green and it's brown, and so he did what a 12-year-old would do, and he started asking very just natural questions. Well, why would you do that? What's the benefit of that? Why doesn't everyone do that? And it was just it was funny, because on one hand it seems like those questions should be so easy to answer, and then some of them are incredibly complex, right? Because it's philosophical, it's how we care for our ground. The cool part was, what my takeaway after our conversation was, the way our weather is and our environments are changing, and just the demand on farmer practices, I do think we've got to maybe start thinking about getting out of this camp of I'm a this, right? Because everybody's kind of, well, I'm a strip tiller, or I'm a no-tiller, or I'm a conventional tiller, and it's like, I think the future is probably, I'm responsive to the environment I'm in, so I do the best job in that pass or that part of the cropping system. I hope over time we adapt to that type of mentality, because this year has been kind of a roller coaster of weather, and I can tell you there was examples where tillage was absolutely the best thing, and not that far away tillage was the absolute worst thing you could have done. And a lot of times we just have a very fixed mindset about it rather than being responsive. So
Yeah, I want to kind of build on this furrow vision conversation. It's kind of a cool concept simply because as an agronomist, the last few years with all the challenging planting conditions we've had, I've seen numerous situations where the seed is not, the grower would be like, I planted it 2 inches and their final planting depth's an inch or 3/4 of an inch. So, Ryan, I'm curious, studying and looking into technology like this, how do you even begin to look at something like that? Where, I mean, you got this communication between the furrow vision, the row unit, all the other intricacies of a row unit, and then the iPad or the monitor and the tractor. It seems really complex. How do you even begin to look at that, and what do you look at?
Yeah, so again, for me, just keeping things as simple as possible. So when you say you had a depth problem there, for example, my brain instantly went to, did we have sidewall collapsing? Like, yes, the disc openers were setting that furrow at 2 1/4, but by the time the seed got to its home, it was maybe 1.5 inches. So then it leads you to like, well, what lever do we have to adjust, assuming that that's the problem? Or let's just assume that it is in this case. So it's like we need to do something with our gauge wheels. Maybe our margin's off. We don't have enough downforce. Or maybe that planter's just hopping all over because ride quality or some ground contact is not favorable. So it's, again, as the agronomist, it's a very detective type work. Like we have a problem in front of us. How do we isolate that problem and fix it? Furrow vision just gives us another tool to understand, are any of those problems that I think might be happening really there? Or if not, let's move on to the next step.
Yeah. Yeah, that's well said. That this is all information that you're out there looking at plants, looking at the plant-to-plant variability. You have all these things in your head that you're trying to figure out how it's going on, what the interaction with the environment, the residue, the soil texture. It's this entirely complex thought process that goes into looking at that picket fence spacing that we want. And then you have all these variables in the field that detract from that accuracy. And there's it just something like that seems so simple can make these conversations we have and learnings we have with growers much better.
Yeah. Let me paint this continuum for you, right? To really hit this point, though, like 30 years ago, it was transformative when we put a seed counter in the cab, right? To actually measure as planted population. Like that was a foundational shift in planting, right? And then we started, and then precision planting came along and said, let's put singulation in front of right in front of growers, and this was 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Right. And then high-speed planters came, and like this is one more dot on a very long continuum of eventually getting to a point where when you plant, you're basically guaranteeing a certain job quality. That you're saying I'm sure there's a population I'm planting, but really what I'm after is I'm after that machine to take care of maximizing the potential of every single plant, and it's one more dot on that big picture.
I think that's a great point, and it's interesting because at least at the time that we're recording this podcast, the announcement last week that Deere acquired Centera. Centera is a technology that we've used in our business to do stand counts. So the interesting thing is, what did we attempt to put in the field, and then what's actually in the field, and those two numbers very rarely match up for a variety of reasons. But I think I like that idea of dots on the map because I was excited when I saw that press release. I think the more information we have about what actually happened after we planted too, so how good of a job did we do, and then how did that corn plant or whatever crop we're talking about respond to the environment and to the planting conditions. I think that's really powerful. And I know for us that really informs what we know and understand about the products we sell, about the quality of job that the plant or the equipment did, and then how the environment impacted it. And it does seem like we deal with a lot of just roller coaster of weather variability. And so, not only how'd the planter do, how'd the seed do, how did the combination of those things react to their environment is really important. So,
Sean, if you said your son was 12,
yeah,
if he stays in agriculture and has a career in the space, 30 years from now, he'll be talking about this new planter technology, right? We're gonna this evolution is natural, and it's gonna keep happening because it's so important.
Right.
What's the most important thing that we do in a single crop production cycle is get that plant out of the ground, healthy and thriving early in its life.
That was one of the challenges. I mean, that's why I wanted to do this podcast and why I think it's so fascinating and why I had such a hard time writing questions, because I'm sitting here looking at, I'm 43. I remember how planters used to be 20 years ago. I look at where they're at now. I'm sitting here thinking, how can we get more advanced than what we're doing? Like, what's the next thing? Like,
I think that's what all 43-year-olds hit the point of, though. Like, there's no way it can get better than today, right? I mean, isn't that kind of what always happens? Like, it can't get better. I mean, and that's, we went through a period of time where it just didn't seem like there was much change, right? Like, we were kind of doing the same thing think about every 1770 that's just been plugging away in the countryside for the last 15 years. And then all of a sudden, it's just like there's just this rush. And I think it's because we understand how impactful that is. It's interesting to go scout. We do a lot of physical walking through the field. And I bet you this year, you could send me to a field and I could tell you what kind of planter was used in the field. And I mean, the last couple of years for this variability, we've just learned, I mean, the quality of that planter has just a massive impact, and the upside potential when you get the planting right, the hybrid right, the whole system like you're talking about, Ryan, is really important. So I want to do one quick wrap-up question on the Furrow Vision, and then we've got a couple other things we've got to talk about for the sake of time. What am I getting when I'm using Furrow Vision? So I have a camera, and I can actually see my furrow being created. Is it giving me any metric feedback outside of being able to visualize that, or I'm just seeing what I'm otherwise not able to see right now?
Yes, this is so it's not fully commercially released yet, right?
Okay.
There's been public announcements of the product coming, but I think I don't want to specifically answer that question, frankly. But I would just say again, this isn't this continuum isn't whatever comes out in year 1 isn't what comes out at the in year 5, right? Like,
seems like a very political answer, doesn't it?
Hey,
we'll have to. I know people at John Deere. We'll have to see if we can get like an announcement as to where we're going with this technology. And
in 2002-ish, right, when auto steer systems came out, guess what they did? They steered straight.
Yeah.
All you could do was put in a single AB line.
Yep.
You couldn't even like assign it to field. You certainly couldn't share those or preload those, right? And that technology continued to evolve into the full suite of products we have in that space today. And I think with any of these things, like whether it's grain cameras or whether we're doing forward-looking things to detect obstacles around us or Furrow Vision, I think the key thing to know is that what happens today is just the starting point in the door for the future technology that it can unlock.
Yeah,
Matt's got a future in politics if this whole science thing doesn't work out. Yeah, that's really good. Guys, I know we talked about this when we started the podcast. We could literally probably do hours on each one of these topics, but for the sake of kind of really highlighting the science that you guys are working on here at your facility, let's switch gears for a minute, and we're just going to jump through a couple things real quick. But Matt, if you would talk a little bit about the See and Spray technology that's now becoming obviously a highly commercialized part of John Deere's portfolio.
Is that new? Is that new too?
Well, it's
that's what we just learned, right? It's we'll just say See, it's not new, right?
Yeah, it's
nothing's really new.
When was the first? Do you know when the first product was sold in targeted spraying?
Oh gosh, I mean, I've been familiar with the term See and Spray for 3 or 4 years.
So I tracked this back to 1979.
Okay.
And there was a Ken Ride sprayer that effectively had 4 metal seats on a toolbar in front of a tractor, right, with what looks like, spray nozzle or like a power washer handle on the front of it, right?
I used to ride on one of those.
Yeah. I mean, so again, this is one of these key things where like farmers for 40 years have been thinking about the problem of why am I spraying a contact herbicide on a bunch of bare ground.
Right. So that was literally See and Spray, right? You had people,
right.
Yeah. So I mean, there's been natural. I mean, so like
it was usually spray and kind of go like this. As it was like I haven't been bit by a mosquito in 25 years.
That's the worst part. As a safety you can look at it and say, well, maybe it should have been behind the tractor,
Correct.
and maybe they should have been spraying backwards instead of forwards. But the point is, like this. Farmers are so innovative, right? Like 45 years ago, they were saying, why are we just wasting all this chemical on something that has no chance of activity, right? And so, did it take a while? Yeah. I mean, it was, you go back to the 2000s, there's been a lot of university research that started to scale us up with machine vision. It took a lot of investment in, frankly, gaming and GPUs and the low-cost nature of those to get it to a point where it's sellable on a vehicle. We've been around See and Spray, I would say, targeted spraying is maybe a broader term that the industry is using, right? That would encompass, on machine and drone based and everything around there. We've been around it for gosh, eight years now. We're, I think, proud to say, I think we were the first field in Iowa that ever got targeted sprayed with live herbicide. We've been running it in some of our bulk fields with both the university, where we just grow grain for our livestock, as well as cooperators, and we're really excited about it. I mean, I think we've had the personal experience of saving 90% in a field.
Wow.
And we've also had the personal experience of saving 40% when our residual herbicide totally crapped out on us, right? And we had a lot of stuff to kill, but we still saved 40% in those environments.
Yeah.
I think the other piece of this that we don't talk about enough, because we really focus on the chemical savings aspect, but what's really interesting to us is you talked about mapping earlier, the mapping of where your weeds are. Right, weeds do move in fields.
Yeah, that never gets talked about, but that's huge.
But like, it's opening up so many ideas of, I got this residual herbicide I'm using. It's got a range of AI rates, active ingredients, right? The original AI. It's got a range of rates. Man, if I know where my weeds are, maybe I should start to be varying the rate of my residual herbicide based on where I know I have my populations at. And how can I maximize things that way? How do I prioritize my scouting in those areas?
Yeah,
right?
that's a really good example of, we have the specific technology that's made for doing this one thing, and yet that we have conversations, and the more we learn about it, this is how we're going to start talking about it. And I think that's a critical piece, because we've had, we had Rodrigo Early from Wisconsin on here, and rarely do we talk about, here's our weed species, here's the actives that are actually effective.
Well, and how about active ingredient in the soil type, right? I mean, how long do you have residual control in varying soil types and weed dispersion? The other thing that I think is interesting to point out in that conversation is 8 years ago, we weren't having near the problems with glyphosate that we're having, right?
Yep.
I mean, 8 years ago, the attitude kind of was, if you see a weed, just go use glyphosate, it'll handle it. Well, now we've had to adapt to layering residuals, trying to prevent any weed from emerging. So even that technology's had to adapt, just as the evolution of our ability to manage and kill weeds has changed. So it's fascinating. Ryan, talk a little bit about the research that you guys did, whatever you're able to share, about how that system integrates.
Yeah, so the weed map is critical. Understanding, again, another data layer we have in our whole agronomic portfolio of where is our weed pressure, and even more specifically, what type of weeds are they?
Yeah.
If it's the same weed across the whole field, then that chemical program can be a little bit different than just going out and buying everything that dealer's trying to sell you.
Yeah.
A little bit of a controversial statement here, but I'll go ahead and say it anyways. Like, farmers want clean fields, but it's okay if there's a weed mist. Like, we can't have 100% weed kill. There's always weeds along, the fence rows or the ditch line or whatever. And there's no yield impact. Visually, it's not aesthetically, appealing to the grower or their neighbor driving down the field, but having a missed weed is not the end of the world. And quite frankly, it's understanding what that weed is, why did we miss it, and then understanding and adjusting, moving back to the next year to making sure we do eradicate that weed. So that's one component of it. And then the second one is just, we completely flipped the spraying game on its head. Going back to Matt's comment, we used to just broadcast blanket the whole field. Now we're targeted spraying. What does that mean for nozzle selection? What does that mean for active ingredient? What does that mean for when are we turning on and how many nozzles? And then on the chemistry side, like, are we actually getting enough AI on that weed to kill it? We know that we can, with see and spray technology, we know we can hit the weed, but are we killing the weed? That's a whole different question, a whole different ball game.
I think that's a good call out, because you look at some of the weed management trials and research. Rarely, if ever, do we get 100% kill, right? You're shooting for 99. A lot of times you get 95, 96, 97%. So I think that's a good call out. If you could, Ryan, can you explain one of the things that fascinated me about this lab is your sprayer testing that you have inside here. Can you tell me about that contraption and what it does and how you use it?
Yeah, so we have a high-speed linear test stand in this facility. I believe it's one of 3 in the world, and we have the capabilities of testing up to 5 nozzles at any given time in a controlled environment. So basically any parameter that you would like to test, minus wind conditions, obviously, because it is indoors. And that thing, in a short amount of time, can get up to 20 miles an hour before it stops, before slamming into the wall. And so with that, we can understand nozzle packages, boom height, boom speed, all those as they interact with one another. And then you can place objects in that linear test stand cage, because it's obviously protected because of the high-speed rail system. and start to understand, is it covering the backside of the weed? Is it penetrating the entire weed? Is it just kind of superficially doing the front side of the weed? And those are things, you mentioned See and Spray has a 40-degree rearward angle on it. So is that something that we need to consider, is like actually spraying the nozzle backwards rather than straight down? Because again, all those physics and dynamics come into play, and those are things that we can investigate in a controlled setting.
Yeah.
It's been so fun to see the companies that are serious about targeted spraying and bringing those products out to their customers. They really care about coverage and efficacy. Right? We say all the time, like, getting it wet is not good enough. Right? That's not the goal. It's got to be the right type of droplets, the right concentration, the right coverage, all levels of the canopy. And you just think about, I mean, again, farmers, it's like the soybean residue thing. Like, everybody wants to do it right. Everybody would love to spray at the absolute perfect time to do that. Well, you look around, as a timely comment about, like, this won't age well the podcast, but like right now, right? It's been wet and cold, right? When we go out and start blasting post applications the next few weeks, right, there's going to be a lot of weeds that are taller than the labeled recommended height, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, again, it's been great to see the industry really step up and not just throw out a technology that hasn't really had the amount of rigor and investment behind it to make sure that it's actually going to kill things.
I know we didn't have to convince you guys that this was a good idea, but I know as I think about this, I do think, in general, the attitude around technology like See and Spray a lot of times is like, oh, that's just the next thing they're trying to sell me. And I don't think, if we don't have exposure to conversations like this, people understand how much science and technology has gone into stewarding weed control really well. And the other thing I'll say that is powerful, and kind of thinking, Matt, about you talking about the spectrum and the dots on the map, I was just thinking about how often I'm in a chemistry conversation and we're relying on, like, the one guy that somehow magically is supposed to predict what AI we need next year at what concentration, versus saying, hey, let's fast forward a handful of years, and a bunch of these machines have run across a bunch of acres, and there's data about certain AIs under certain conditions, and then what their kill or failure rate is, and all of a sudden that algorithm starts to get really informed. What a powerful day that is for herbicide and pesticide management. Because right now we're still kind of at the place where we have to use what we believe is the most powerful tool, and use kind of the best 30,000-foot guidance, because that's the best we can do today. Well, if we have a bunch more information down the road, that'll be really powerful. So,
yeah, the other thing your listeners should be aware of too is that companies are working together.
Yeah.
Like, there's a whole consortium of OEMs that make machinery, and companies that make drones and technology, and companies that sell chemicals, right? And they're collaborating to make sure these solutions are successful for all the farmers that we all serve.
Yeah, it's super important. For the sake of time, we're gonna kind of jump ahead here a little bit, and I think this will actually be a fun question, and I would say open to either one of you. But give us maybe a teaser. I'm sure you guys probably know some stuff you can't say, but give us a teaser about what you see coming in the midterm future. What should we be excited about as technology users?
Yeah, I think there's some things that so we all have sort of heard about autonomy, right? And I think the autonomy conversation very quickly gets pointed into, like, well, that means I'm pulling a person out of the cab, right? And that's part of it. But I really think that that's more than a 5 to 10 year sort of broad scale picture. But I'm 100% convinced that the investment in autonomy is also investing in job quality. So, because if you're going to pull the operator out, right? Yes, you have to still steer the vehicle. That's a whole lot easier than knowing what adjustment to make on your planter, knowing how to ensure that all your nozzles are doing exactly what they need to do, to ensure that you're not throwing grain out the back of the combine. So I'm excited in the value customers are going to get in, I think, yes, technology can complicate things, but I think we're starting to get towards this inflection point where that technology is really focused on simplifying the decision-making that happens in the cab.
Yeah. Yeah, a few years ago, we were answering one or two questions with probably reasonable accuracy. Today, we're answering, I mean, how many data points do you get out of a new, I mean, I'm talking just how many right? Downforce, ride contact, singulation, spacing, speed. I mean, all these things, and all
It's
of
one
those
machine.
inform us. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
one machine.
One of the 7 steps in the process.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty impressive. But we answer so many questions, right? If you walked out as an agronomist into a field and you didn't have any of those, you'd naturally start asking each one of those questions, and instead you can literally pull your phone out of your pocket and you have access to
Instant
all that.
answers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's pretty impressive. So
So, Ryan or Matt, and maybe I'll gear this one to Ryan. My final question before Sean closes episode 1: what's something you're wanting to research that maybe you haven't been able to answer or want to answer looking into the future?
Yeah, going back to this planner topic seems to be a little bit of a theme for us, is understanding what is truly going on after the closing wheel has gone down a row. It's very hard to understand what seed to soil contact is. Like, sure, we can go dig and we can do a slice test and we can kind of start to understand what that looked like, but there's a human manipulation that occurred there to get to that data point, right? So if there was an area that we could move as an industry to truly understand, as the planner's done doing its job, what is that job quality? Because today it's very hard to know what's going on behind a closing wheel. And you go to any farm show and you'll have 300 people trying to sell you closing wheels, whether it's 1-stage, 2-stage, double wheel, the list goes on and on. Like, which one truly performs the best? We don't really know that today, at least from my perspective. We don't know how well that seed furrow is closing up and what that seed to soil contact looks like. So that would be my wish list, maybe by the time I end my career, that we could get
That's
to.
a good one.
it'd be powerful if you actually had a closed furrow score. I don't know how. Yeah, good luck. Matt, as we wrap up, want to obviously thank you guys for this. But would you leave us with your lab's mission on advancing the science behind digital innovation and precision technology?
Our mission is innovate, educate, and outreach. We believe that we can help agriculture by developing new technologies that have a direct impact on the farm. And we believe that we need to educate to inspire. Right? What that means is that we know that agriculture is going to continue to be fueled by folks that didn't always grow up on a farm. And, from our perspective, how do we make sure that a student from Kansas City in cybersecurity knows that, hey, ag has some cool things going on in that space as well, and somebody from Chicago in computer science or data science gets excited about agriculture. So, we're passionate about that. And on the outreach side, it's just our service-driven mindset. I mean, it's so powerful to hear the positive feedback, Sean, that your farmers provided from the experience with us, because we only do things at 110%. And when we're on the outreach side, we're constantly trying to figure out how do we engage with and connect and help de-risk the complexity that we have in agriculture today through hopefully technology and some automation.
I really appreciate that. One of the things we've always tried to do on our show is express a lot of gratitude, and I know, the mirror, the ends of this relationship is Andrew and I built a great relationship because he would humbly teach us and teach our growers, and I think about that day we spent in here. I mean, it was just, you guys did just a great job educating the people who are actually out doing this, and they had a ton of gratitude, and you just got to see the wheels turn, and so you guys are doing a great job of that. Thank you guys for the depth of the science and research you guys are doing, the way that that's contributing to the technology we use in the field today. And I look forward to coming back and talking about how to use it, how to implement it into our management.
Me too.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.